Welcome. As you settle in, perhaps lying down, perhaps sitting quietly at the end of your day, allow your breathing to slow, your body to loosen, and your thoughts to drift. This is your time to rest. Before we begin, let me ask you softly, where are you listening from? And what time is it there? It is a small question, but it anchors you here, in this moment of stillness, as we prepare to travel gently back into history. Tonight's journey takes us to London in the year 1666, to narrow, crowded streets, wooden houses pressed tightly together, and a city unprepared for the disaster that would come. You may know it as the Great Fire of London, a blaze that tore through the heart of the city for 4 days, leaving ash, ruin, and thousands displaced. This is not a tale told with drama or urgency. It will unfold slowly, in steady rhythm, with details that paint a picture but do not overwhelm. The goal here is not to excite, but to soothe. To allow you to imagine without strain, to wander through history in quiet reflection. And, if you choose, to let sleep find you along the way. And when our story comes to a close, I have added soothing music at the end of the video. Gentle, steady, unhurried, to help you drift deeper into calm and toward rest. So now, imagine London before the fire, a city alive with merchants, bakers and craftsmen, with taverns and markets, churches and crowded homes. The air is thick with the smell of wood smoke, roasting meat, and damp cobblestones. And beneath it all lies the quiet truth. In a city built almost entirely of timber, disaster waits silently, just beyond the spark of a single flame. Imagine yourself walking through the streets of London in the summer of 1666. The city is alive, crowded, and noisy, yet it feels smaller, more intimate than the London of today. Houses lean inward across narrow lanes, their upper floors so close they almost touch. Wooden beams, darkened by age, jut out above you, and the walls are patched with plaster. The smell of smoke from countless hearths drifts above, mingling with the sharp scent of animals and food being cooked in open stalls. The population has grown, pressing into the city's winding streets. People crowd markets, haggle with shopkeepers, and call out from doorways. Children play among carts and barrels, their laughter mixing with the creak of wagon wheels and the shouts of merchants. Bread is the staple of life, and bakers' shops are found in every district. Imagine the warmth of a bakery, the smell of fresh loaves thick in the air, mingling with the sharper, darker scent of the ovens themselves. Flour dust lingers on the clothes of the workers, and baskets of bread are stacked and sold to passers-by. The Thames River is the city's lifeline. Barges and boats carry goods in and out. Coal, timber, grain, and wine. Standing near the water, you hear the slap of waves against wood, the shouts of sailors, and the creak of ropes straining. The river smells faintly of tar and damp wood, mixed with the sharp tang of fish. It is busy, constant, always alive with trade. At home, life is more contained. Imagine stepping inside a modest house. The rooms are small, the ceilings low, the air thick with the smoke of a hearth fire. A pot of stew bubbles slowly, the scent of meat and herbs filling the space. Candles flicker, their wax dripping. Beds are small and crowded, shared by several members of a family. Comfort is simple, yet life has its rhythm. Meals, prayers, sleep, and work. Churches mark the weeks with bells that echo through narrow streets. Sundays are for sermons and rest, though even here, the air inside is smoky from hundreds of candles. Faith is central, giving shape to lives that are often hard and uncertain. But London in 1666 is not without unease. The memory of plague still lingers, having claimed tens of thousands only the year before. Some streets still feel emptier than they once did, their silence a reminder of lives lost. And though the city bustles, beneath it lies fragility. Narrow streets, crowded houses, and buildings made almost entirely of wood, with roofs of thatch or pitch. Imagine the city at night. Lanterns glow faintly along streets, casting pools of weak light. Windows shine dimly, but shadows dominate. The air is cool, tinged with the faint scent of wood smoke. London sleeps, unaware of what is to come. This is daily life. Busy, crowded, fragile, and ordinary. A city alive, yet built upon timber and chance. A city where survival is steady but precarious. And it is in this fragile balance that a single spark will soon ignite. The night it began, the spark in Pudding Lane. It is just after midnight on Sunday, September 2nd, 1666. London is quiet. The streets are narrow and hushed, their life tucked away behind wooden shutters. The only sound is the occasional creak of a cartwheel left standing, the distant bark of a dog, the faint lap of the Thames against its banks. On Pudding Lane, a bakery sits in stillness. It belongs to Thomas Farriner, the King's baker. Inside, the warmth of the ovens lingers from a day's work. The air smells of flour, yeast, and charred wood. Bags of grain are stacked neatly, shelves filled with loaves. The walls, beams, and floorboards are dry, old, and coated in flour dust, the kind that floats unseen, clinging to rafters and corners. Somewhere within this quiet shop, a coal glows longer than expected. Perhaps it rests in the oven's ash. Perhaps it has fallen unnoticed into the woodpile. It is nothing more than a spark, faint and fragile. Yet, in a city built of timber and pitch, that spark has all the fuel it needs. The fire begins slowly, almost shy. A wisp of smoke rises, curling upward. Then a small flame takes shape, licking at wood. It spreads to a beam, to rope, to straw, gathering strength. Inside the bakery, shadows flicker and shift as the orange light grows. The Farriner family sleeps upstairs, unaware of what is happening below. Their breaths are steady, their dreams unbroken. But beneath them, the bakery is transforming into a furnace. The beams crackle, the shelves glow, the air thickens with smoke. Outside, the street is quiet. A watchman passes, his lantern dim, the light swaying with each step. He smells smoke, but dismisses it at first. The city often smells of hearth fires, chimneys that never quite burn clean. Yet, as he looks again, he notices a faint glow behind shutters. He pauses, frowning, but then continues, his footsteps fading into the night. Minutes later, the fire pushes outward. Shutters split, timbers snap, flames burst into the narrow lane. The night air fills with sparks, carried on a growing wind. The Farriner family wakes to heat and smoke. They scramble from their beds, rushing down staircases already filled with fire. They escape into the street, but their maid cannot keep pace. She falters, and in the confusion, she is lost. The first life claimed by the Great Fire of London. The flames are hungry now. They leap across the lane, from house to house. These homes are close together, their upper stories leaning inward. Their beams dry and coated with years of soot and pitch. The fire does not need time. It leaps like a predator, claiming each building in turn. Neighbors wake to shouts and bells. Windows fly open. Men and women lean out, eyes wide, voices trembling. They grab buckets, filling them with water from wells or pumps, forming hurried chains in the street. But the fire is already too large. Buckets splash against walls, hissing as flames consume timber faster than water can quench them. The watchmen sound alarms. Bells ring into the night, carrying news of disaster through narrow streets. Some Londoners dismiss it. Fires were not unusual in the city, but this is no ordinary blaze. The wind freshens, carrying sparks farther down Pudding Lane, igniting roofs and haylofts, carts and stables. The fire begins to spread beyond the bakery, beyond the street, into the very heart of London. Imagine the scene as dawn approaches. Smoke rises thick and black, blotting out the pale light of morning. Families rush into streets, their arms filled with bundles of clothing, with chests hastily tied shut. Children cry, clutching toys or scraps of bread. Horses neigh in panic, carts overturn, barrels roll. The fire roars louder, timbers snapping like bones, roofs collapsing in showers of sparks. What began as a single coal in a bakery oven has become something unstoppable. London, built of wood and crowded tight, offers itself as fuel. The fire gathers strength, fed by wind, by hunger, by the fragility of the city itself. In Pudding Lane, the balance of ordinary life has tipped into chaos. The narrow streets that once bustled with bakers and merchants are now rivers of flame and ash. People run, carrying what they can. Behind them, walls collapse, chimneys crumble, and houses vanish into fire. The city does not yet know the scale of what has begun. They believe it is a fire, but not yet the fire. Within hours, though, it will sweep beyond these lanes, climbing toward churches, markets, and halls of stone. And as the sun rises fully over London, it shines not upon a city waking to another day, but upon a city consumed. The sun rises on September 2nd, 1666, but London does not greet it with calm. Instead, the sky is already choked with smoke, dark plumes climbing high above rooftops. From the riverbank, the city looks as though a storm has descended, not of rain, but of fire and ash. In the early hours, the blaze spreads quickly through Pudding Lane and into neighbouring streets. Houses collapse as timbers snap in the heat, the fire leaping forward, eager and relentless. Families stumble into the streets, carrying trunks, blankets, and whatever possessions they can seize in moments of panic. Some drag carts piled high, others clutch nothing but their children. The air is thick with ash, cinders falling like black snow. By mid-morning, the fire surges outward. St. Margaret's, the parish church near Fish Street, burns fiercely, its bell melting, collapsing with a crash that echoes across the city. Sparks fly across the riverfront, igniting warehouses filled with oil, tar, pitch, and spirits. Goods meant for trade, now turned to fuel. Flames roar skyward as barrels explode, showering sparks onto roofs blocks away. Imagine the heat in the narrow streets. Air shimmering, clothes damp with sweat, skin prickling even at a distance. Buckets of water are thrown against walls, but the effort feels pitiful, swallowed immediately by the blaze. The wooden houses act like kindling, their close-packed beams igniting one after another. The Lord Mayor of London, Sir Thomas Bloodworth, is summoned to the scene. He watches as flames climb higher, his face tense. When advised to pull down houses to stop the fire's advance, he hesitates. It is costly, it is destructive, and he cannot bring himself to act decisively. He utters words that will later haunt him. A woman could piss it out. He turns away, leaving the fire to spread unchecked. By afternoon, the fire has consumed much of the riverside. Moving swiftly toward the heart of the city, crowds flee toward the Thames, dragging possessions to the water's edge. Boats become crowded with families and goods, oars splashing as they push away from burning wharves. Others run to the open fields outside the city walls. carrying bedding, livestock, or coffers. Imagine standing on London Bridge, the river below you filled with small boats and barges, all heavy with people and belongings. From this vantage, the fire seems endless, roaring through streets, smoke blotting the sky, bells tolling and then silenced as churches collapse. The bridge itself trembles, its wooden structures catching sparks. Soon, even here, safety is uncertain. Throughout the day, the wind blows strong from the east, carrying sparks farther into the city. Roofs ignite blocks away, flames leap across alleys and lanes, and entire streets vanish in hours. The fire spreads not slowly, but with terrifying speed, racing through Cheapside, climbing toward St. Paul's Cathedral. Merchants scramble to save their goods. Bales of cloth are hauled into carts, barrels of wine rolled into cellars, coffers of coin dragged into the streets, but many find their efforts wasted. The fire moves too quickly. What is not carried away is left to burn. Imagine a wealthy merchant's home. The servants rush through halls, arms filled with tapestries and silverware. The mistress gathers jewels, stuffing them into a small chest. Children cry, confused by the chaos. Outside, the fire roars closer, the windows glowing red. In the end, they abandon the house, leaving behind what cannot be carried, their footsteps quick on cobblestones as flames claim everything left behind. As dusk approaches, the city glows red against the darkening sky. From miles away, the fire can be seen, a column of smoke and flame towering above London. The smell of burning wood, pitch, and flesh carries on the wind. In villages beyond the city, people gather on hillsides, staring in silence at the spectacle. And within London, the day ends with chaos. Tens of thousands are already homeless. Streets are choked with carts and wagons. Riverside piers crowded with desperate families. The fire has consumed a wide swath of the city, and still it spreads, stronger than ever. Imagine now the first night after the fire began. Families huddle in fields beyond the city walls, their possessions piled around them. Children lie awake, coughing from smoke, listening to the distant roar of fire that never ceases. Above them, the sky glows orange, the stars hidden behind ash. The city that was their home is being erased, and they can only watch, helpless, as the flames continue their march. The first day of the Great Fire has ended, and already London is forever changed. Yet this is only the beginning. For centuries, St. Paul's Cathedral had dominated the London skyline. Long before the fire, its towering Gothic spire rose like a finger of stone into the clouds, visible from the river and from distant fields. To Londoners, it was not only a church, but a landmark, a centre of civic life, and a symbol of stability in a city often shaken by plague, famine, and unrest. The cathedral was more than a place of worship. Its vast nave was lined with merchant stalls, where books, pamphlets, and trinkets were sold. Lawyers and businessmen met under its high arches, their voices carrying into the vaulted spaces. Its stone walls gave a sense of permanence. So, unlike the wooden houses crowding the city below, and so, as the fire pressed deeper into London, many believed St. Paul's would stand firm, untouchable. But appearances deceived. Repairs had been underway for some time, and wooden scaffolding clung to the cathedral's exterior, dry timber waiting to catch. Inside, the vaults and chapels were packed with goods stored by printers and booksellers. Piles of paper, bales of cloth, and wooden presses filled alcoves and corridors, fuel hidden within the stone. It was as though the cathedral, unknowingly, had been prepared for destruction. On September 3rd, the second full day of the fire, the flames reached Ludgate Hill. From the narrow streets below, sparks landed on the scaffolding, glowing and smouldering. At first, smoke drifted lazily upward, thin and faint. Some dismissed it, thinking the stone would hold. But then the fire found its way inward, into the dry wood and the heaps of paper. Inside, the transformation was rapid. Imagine the vast nave, dark but for the flicker of firelight. Shadows danced on pillars as smoke thickened, curling along arches. Wooden pews ignited one by one, their crackles echoing in the hollow chamber. Tapestries smouldered, statues blackened, and flames climbed ropes of scaffolding like ladders, racing upward into the roof. The roof itself was timber, thick and ancient, covered in sheets of lead. Once the fire reached it, the blaze grew furious. The timbers snapped, beams fell, and molten lead began to pour. Witnesses later described the rivers of lead running down the walls and spilling into the streets. Streams of glowing metal that hardened into strange, twisted shapes as they cooled. The air around the cathedral grew unbearable. Imagine standing at a distance, watching the flames leap higher, the heat prickling your skin even across open space. Ash swirled in the air, carried by wind, stinging the eyes and filling the mouth with bitterness. The bells of St. Paul's, heavy and long revered, began to collapse. Each fall was like thunder, shaking the ground, the sound rolling over the crowds who had gathered to watch. Outside, Londoners wept openly. Some fell to their knees, crossing themselves, praying aloud. For them, the cathedral was more than stone. It was sacred. To watch it consumed was to watch their city lose its very heart. Rumors spread that this was divine judgment, punishment for sins, for pride, for the city's excesses. Others simply stared in silence, unable to comprehend that something so vast could vanish so quickly. As the spire caught, flames raced upward, climbing into the night sky. For hours it glowed, a torch above the city, until at last it buckled. With a roar, it crashed down into the inferno below, sending sparks and embers into the air, falling like fiery rain across the rooftops nearby. The sound of its fall echoed for miles. Imagine being a child in the crowd, clutching your mother's hand. You watch as the great spire falls, the glow reflected in her tear-streaked face. Around you, the crowd gasps, some screaming, some falling silent. For generations, families had looked to St. Paul's as a landmark of permanence. Now, before your eyes, it is gone. By morning, little remained but scorched stone walls. The roof was gone, the spire destroyed, the interior reduced to rubble. The carved arches stood hollow and blackened, windows shattered, floors buried in ash. Fragments of books and parchment fluttered in the air, disintegrating at the touch. The once proud cathedral was now a ruin, silent except for the crackle of smouldering wood. For many, the fall of St. Paul's marked the turning point of the fire. If even stone could fall, then nothing was safe. No house, no market, no church could be spared. It was proof of the fire's power that London itself could be undone, no matter its pride or history. The sight of St. Paul's in flames would live in memory long after the fire ended. Londoners who survived would speak of it with awe and sorrow, the way others might recall a dream that turned suddenly to nightmare. For centuries after, people would say that the fall of St. Paul's was not only the fall of a building, but the fall of an old London, one that could never be rebuilt in quite the same way. As the fire spread further into the heart of the city, life for Londoners became a scramble for survival. Entire streets emptied in panic. Families carried what they could, though most quickly discovered how little could truly be saved when fire pressed close. Imagine the sight of Cheapside, once a grand market street lined with shops and merchants. Now it is choked with carts, horses, and people, all moving at once. Mothers clutched their children's hands. Fathers dragged trunks on crude wheels. Servants push barrows loaded with furniture. Some carry nothing more than a bundle of clothes, tied hastily in cloth. Others drag chests, heavy with coin or plate, sweating and stumbling as the flames draw nearer. For many, escape meant heading toward the Thames. The river was crowded with barges and boats, pressed into service to carry people and goods away. Imagine standing at the riverside, the air heavy with smoke. Families shout to boatmen, waving coins, pleading for space. The boats rock and sway as men load bundles of bedding, cages of chickens, barrels of salted meat. In the confusion, many are left behind, watching helplessly as others float to safety while the fire presses closer. Others fled into the fields outside the city walls. More fields, just north of the city, quickly filled with refugees. Imagine that wide, open ground transformed into a makeshift camp. Families sit on the grass, surrounded by piles of belongings. Children cry, coughing from smoke. Dogs bark, carts creak, voices murmur in confusion. People try to make shelter from blankets or overturned carts, knowing they may be there for days. The rich and poor alike fled. But even here, the difference in survival was clear. Wealthier families hired wagons or barges in advance, carrying away trunks of valuables, beds, even food stores. Poorer Londoners stumbled into the fields with nothing more than the clothes on their backs. For some, the fire destroyed not only their homes, but every possession they owned. Amid the crowds, imagine a single family. The father pushes a cart piled with pots, blankets, and a single chair. The mother carries a bundle wrapped in cloth, inside it bread and a small Bible. Their children walk barefoot, tired, clutching her skirts. They reach the edge of more fields and collapse onto the ground, staring back at the red glow above the city. They are alive, but their home is gone. Animals added to the chaos. Horses neighed in panic, pulling carts wildly. Dogs darted through crowds, yelping, confused by smoke. Some families tried to drive livestock out of the city. Cows, goats, pigs herded through narrow streets, adding to the confusion as people pressed forward. The bleating and lowing mixed with shouts and the distant roar of the fire, turning the city into a cacophony of sound. Not all who fled were allowed safety. Guards at the city gates hesitated to let carts pass, fearing looting or chaos beyond. Some families were forced to abandon their belongings just to get out, leaving carts piled at the gates, possessions scattered in the dust. Imagine the anguish of dropping a chest of family treasures, knowing the fire would claim it within hours. By the second and third days, the numbers of displaced swelled into tens of thousands. Open fields and village edges around London filled with people sleeping under the stars. Smoke drifted overhead even miles from the city, turning sunsets a deep, unnatural red. At night, the fields were restless. Babies cried, dogs barked, and coughing echoed across the camps. Families whispered of what they had lost, of what might come next. Some prayed aloud, others sat in silence, staring at the orange glow on the horizon. The fire did not rest, and neither did they. Imagine lying on the grass, using a bundle of clothes as a pillow. The earth is cold beneath you, the air sharp with ash. Around you, voices murmur, fires crackle in makeshift pits, and the distant roar of London burning never ceases. Above, no stars are visible, only a haze of smoke glowing faintly with fire. Sleep is thin, broken, filled with dreams of collapse and loss. This was the reality for Londoners who survived the fire's path. Escape was not relief. It was the beginning of hunger, uncertainty, and the knowledge that the city behind them was being erased, street by street. The Great Fire was not just a blaze of buildings, it was a flood of people, pressing outward, carrying scraps of their lives, unsure of where they would sleep or what tomorrow would bring. In moments of disaster, people often look to leaders for order. In 1666 London, that leadership faltered. The fire was swift, the destruction immense, and those charged with protecting the city struggled to act. At first, the responsibility fell to the Lord Mayor of London, Sir Thomas Bloodworth. On the morning of the first day, he was called to Pudding Lane. He saw the blaze leaping from house to house, growing faster than buckets of water could contain. The law allowed him to order houses pulled down to stop the fire's spread. A harsh measure, but the only effective one. Yet he hesitated. To destroy houses meant destroying property, and he feared the anger of wealthy landowners. He dismissed the danger with words that would echo bitterly in memory. A woman could piss it out. Imagine the frustration of the men beside him, watching flames leap across alleys while he turned away. By the time his hesitation ended, the chance to contain the blaze was gone. The fire raced forward, fueled by wind and timbers, unstoppable by simple buckets. As the fire grew, the city descended into confusion. Buckets of water were passed hand to hand, chains of men, women, and children forming along wells and pumps. But the fire consumed faster than water could quench. Axes and hooks were brought to tear down houses, but too often the work began too late. Entire blocks fell not to human planning, but to the fire itself. Blame spread quickly. Some whispered that foreigners had started the fire, Dutch or French agents, enemies of England at the time. Strangers were accused in the streets, beaten by angry crowds. Even in disaster, suspicion thrived. Imagine a man with a foreign accent stumbling through smoke, only to be seized by panicked Londoners convinced he held a hidden torch. Fear needed a target, and in chaos, reason was often lost. By the second day, King Charles II himself stepped in. Young, energetic, he rode through the city with his brother, the Duke of York. Dressed simply, he gave orders directly, urging men to tear down houses to create fire breaks. His presence steadied some, but by then, the fire was immense. Even with the king's command, the flames outran the axes. Imagine seeing the king on horseback, his face lit by fire, his cloak streaked with ash. For a moment, you might feel hope. Yet behind him, the blaze continues, undiminished, swallowing the city faster than orders can be carried out. Parliament met in alarm, debating whether to blow up houses with gunpowder to halt the fire's spread. At last, this was done. Explosions shattering the city as buildings were destroyed before the flames could reach them. In some places, this tactic worked, halting the blaze for a time. In others, the fire leaped the gaps, continuing its march. Leadership shifted from hesitation to desperate measures, but for ordinary Londoners, it was difficult to see the difference. The fire continued, families fled, and the city burned. In the absence of order, survival became personal. Each family for itself. Each man and woman carrying what they could, praying the fire would not catch them before they escaped. And above all, the search for blame remained. Was it the negligence of the baker, who left his oven smouldering? Was it the failure of Bloodworth, who turned away when decisive action was needed? Was it foreigners, as fear whispered in crowded camps? Or was it, as many believed, the judgment of God upon a sinful city? Imagine sitting in Moorfields on the third night, the city still glowing red, ash drifting like snow. Around you, voices murmur, pointing fingers, arguing softly in the dark. The fire is not yet out, but already Londoners are searching for someone, or something, to hold responsible for their ruin. The city's leaders did what they could, but it was not enough. The fire remained stronger than orders, stronger than fear, stronger than hope. And so it burned on, beyond the reach of command, into the heart of London's very identity. By the third day of the fire, London was no longer a city of houses alone. It was a city of ruins. Streets, once filled with trade and chatter, were now seas of flame. The fire spread first into markets, the lifeblood of London's commerce. Cheapside, once the busiest shopping street in the city, filled with goldsmiths, drapers, and mercers, became unrecognizable. Stalls and shops, packed with cloth, silks, and goods from across the world, fed the fire like kindling. Imagine the air heavy with the smell of burning fabric, wool smoldering, silk curling, leather crackling, piles of goods meant to be wealth, now transformed into fuel. The Royal Exchange, the very heart of trade, fell next. This was where merchants from across Europe gathered. Its grand arcades filled with voices, bargaining, promising, and recording contracts. But, in the fire, its grandeur meant little. Flames climbed its walls, leaping across its open courtyard, filling the arcades with smoke. Within hours, the building was a hollow shell, its timbers collapsing into the square where so many deals had once been struck. Warehouses along the Thames fared no better. Imagine vast stores of sugar, wine, coal, and timber igniting in bursts. Barrels of spirits exploded, sending flaming liquid coursing through streets. The sweet, acrid scent of sugar and tar thickened the air, mingling with the sharpness of smoke. Entire fortunes vanished in minutes, reduced to ash and molten puddles. The guildhalls, symbols of the city's proud crafts and trades, also fell. The great Guildhall, centre of London's civic life, stood for a time, its stone walls resisting. But its roof and timbers were no match for the blaze. By the third day, flames consumed its chambers, its long traditions reduced to smoke. Smaller guildhalls, of the weavers, the fishmongers, the tailors, vanished one by one, their records and treasures gone forever. Imagine standing at the entrance to one of these great halls as fire takes hold. The carvings blacken, the windows shatter, and within centuries of records, parchment, ledgers, charters, curl into flame. The knowledge of generations is erased in minutes, drifting upward as ash. The city's wealthiest quarters did not escape. Noble houses, filled with tapestries, paintings, and silver, burned as easily as the humblest cottage. Fire recognized no rank. Rich and poor alike saw their possessions vanish. Outside the walls, in the fields, they sat together. A merchant who had traded across seas, beside a labourer who had carried sacks of grain, both staring at the same red horizon, both with nothing left. By night, the fire's glow was visible for miles, a beacon of destruction. Villagers in the countryside stood on hills, watching silently as the city blazed. The sound carried, too, the crash of collapsing timbers, the roar of flames, the occasional thunder of exploding barrels. From afar, it seemed almost unreal. From within, it was inescapable. Imagine yourself walking the streets as the fire advanced. You hear the crackle of burning wood, the groan of beams as they buckle, the shouts of men trying desperately to save what they can. Smoke stings your eyes, your throat burns, ash coats your skin. The world narrows to heat, noise, and confusion. Around you, families drag trunks, merchants clutch purses of coin, priests carry relics and books, but all paths lead the same way. Away from the fire, always away. By the end of the third day, London's markets were gone, its trade in ruins, its civic halls erased. The fire had taken not only homes but the very institutions that defined the city. In fields outside the walls, thousands whispered of what they had lost. Not just possessions, but the heart of their city itself. The fire had destroyed not only houses, but memory, tradition, and identity. London was no longer a city of merchants and guilds. It was a city of smoke, ruin, and ash. For Londoners in 1666, the world was not explained by science and chance alone. Plague, famine, and fire were not only disasters, they were signs. And so, as the great fire devoured their city, many turned to faith for meaning and for judgment. The year itself felt ominous. 1666. To some, the numbers spoke of prophecy, the number of the beast, a year destined for catastrophe. In taverns and sermons alike, people had whispered of apocalypse, of divine wrath. When the fire came, those whispers turned into conviction. This was not accident, they said. This was punishment. Imagine the fields outside the city, where families huddled in smoke-filled air. Among the murmurs of hunger and fear, you would hear prayers whispered aloud. A mother kneeling with her children, hands clasped, begging forgiveness for sins unnamed. A priest standing on a hill, his voice trembling as he urged the crowd to repent, to see the fire as a warning. The crackle of the burning city became, to many, the voice of judgment. Churches, once sanctuaries, fell one after another. St. Paul's Cathedral, once thought indestructible, lay in ruins. Smaller parish churches, with their bells, their relics, their altars, were consumed in hours. For believers, it was unthinkable. Houses of God turned to ash. If even the sacred could not stand, what hope remained? At the same time, others clung to faith for strength. Ministers led processions in the fields, carrying crosses, reading psalms by candlelight. The glow faint against the firelit sky. People sang hymns together, voices rising in unison, a fragile comfort against the roar of destruction. Imagine the sound, a trembling chorus of weary voices, the words familiar, repeated, steady, while above them sparks drifted and the horizon glowed red. But fear was not limited to God's judgment. Many believed the fire was no natural blaze. Rumors spread that Catholics had set it as part of a plot against Protestant London. Others accused the Dutch or the French, enemies in war. Foreigners in the city, merchants, travellers, anyone who looked different or spoke with an accent, were attacked in the streets, beaten or killed by mobs desperate for someone to blame. In chaos, suspicion thrived. Imagine a French merchant fleeing with his family, clutching his child. The crowd turns on him, shouting, convinced he is the cause. He protests, terrified, but words cannot pierce fear. Stones are thrown, fists raised, until soldiers intervene. For those on the margins, survival meant not only escaping the flames, but the wrath of fearful neighbors. Faith was not only a bomb, but also a blade. It gave comfort to some, scapegoats to others, and meaning, whether hope or despair, to nearly everyone. In the end, most Londoners saw the fire as divine will. Whether it was punishment or purification, it was beyond their control. In the smoke and ruin, they felt the weight of something larger than themselves. And as they prayed, as they whispered and wept, the fire continued, indifferent to belief or fear. Imagine lying in the open fields at night, the ground cold, your belongings beside you. Around you, voices pray aloud, some in whispers, some in sobs. You close your eyes, but behind your lids the fire still glows, painting the night red. And in your heart you wonder, is this judgment, or is it survival? Faith gave answers, but no relief. The fire burned on, heedless of prayer or prophecy, until all that remained of London's churches and homes was smoke. By the third and fourth days of the fire, London had emptied. Whole parishes, once noisy with life, stood silent except for the roar of flames. Their inhabitants had spilled into the open fields beyond the city walls. Moorfields, Finsbury Fields, Clerkenwell Green. Any space large enough to hold the crowds. There, the reality of survival began. Imagine the scene at Moorfields. Grass trampled flat by carts, belongings piled in heaps, families huddled close together. The air smells of damp earth, of smoke carried on the wind, of sweat and livestock crowded to near. A low hum of voices never ceases. Murmurs, coughs, prayers, the occasional sob. London, a city of stone and timber, has become a city of tents, carts, and blankets stretched between poles. Shelter was improvised. Some overturned wagons and crawled beneath. Others spread blankets over sticks, crouching in the shadowy space beneath the cloth. A few wealthy families brought canvas tents, setting them up like small fortresses amid the sea of makeshift shelters. But most had little more than the open sky. At night, the dew fell, soaking clothes and bedding, chilling bodies already weakened by exhaustion. Food was scarce. In the rush to flee, families had brought what they could: a loaf of bread, a sack of flour, a salted ham, but these quickly dwindled. Imagine a mother breaking a stale loaf into thin pieces, pressing a fragment into each child's hand, her own share barely a crumb. Others scavenged, searching the ground for dropped morsels, bartering with neighbors for scraps. The smell of smoke mixed with the faint, bitter aroma of thin broth, cooked in blackened pots over small fires in the fields. Water was drawn from wells, but demand outstripped supply. Lines formed at pumps, people waiting with buckets and jars, their throats dry, their voices hoarse from smoke. The water itself tasted of earth and metal, but it was life. Without it, the coughing worsened, and thirst pressed harder than hunger. The nights were long. Imagine lying on the grass with only a blanket for cover. Beneath you, the ground is hard, uneven, cold. Above, the glow of the fire still stains the sky, a dull orange that flickers even miles away. Sleep comes fitfully, broken by coughs, the whimper of children, the restless stir of animals. Dreams turn to ash, filled with collapsing houses, smoke, and loss. For children, the fields became strange playgrounds. Too young to understand the full weight of disaster, they wandered among the carts, chasing one another, inventing games amid the ruin. Their laughter rang thin against the background of weeping and coughing, a reminder of innocence clinging where despair threatened to overwhelm. Parents watched, weary but grateful for the distraction, their eyes never leaving the glowing city in the distance. Tensions rose among the crowds. With so many pressed together, tempers flared. Some accused others of hoarding food. Some fought over space for carts and shelters. Rumors of thieves spread. Men slipping through camps at night, stealing what little had been saved from the fire. Fear of fire was replaced by fear of hunger, of theft, of lawlessness. Soldiers patrolled, their presence meant to steady, though even they were weary, their eyes ringed with soot. And always there was uncertainty. Would their homes survive? Would the fire ever end? What awaited them when they returned? Imagine sitting on the damp grass, staring at the faint outline of the city through smoke. Your chest feels hollow, your stomach empty, your future unknown. The possessions you clutched, a chest of clothes, a single Bible, a locket, feel absurdly small against the scale of your loss. By the fourth night, many had accepted that their homes were gone. Their thoughts turned instead to tomorrow, to rebuilding, to whether they could ever return to the lives they once knew. But for now, survival was simpler, sharper. Find food, find water, endure the night, wake again, repeat. In those fields, London was not divided by rank or wealth. The fire had levelled all distinctions. Noblemen and paupers sat side by side, their possessions piled beside them, their children coughing in the same smoke, their futures equally uncertain. The fire had made them one community of refugees, bound not by choice but by necessity. And through it all, the fire burned on, still visible on the horizon. Its roar was never silenced, its glow never faded. Even far from the flames, the fire dominated every breath, every thought, every prayer. By the fourth day, the fire was no longer a collection of flames licking at houses and markets. It had become a storm, a living, roaring force that consumed almost everything in its path. The city's very heart was engulfed. Entire parishes vanished in hours, their houses collapsing in showers of sparks, their churches toppling as roofs caved inward. The fire did not creep. It surged, it leaped, it devoured. Sparks were carried on the wind, igniting roofs streets away. Flames arched across alleys like bridges of fire. No matter where you looked, London seemed ablaze. Imagine the sound. A constant roar, like waves breaking endlessly against rock. The crack of timbers snapping, the crash of walls falling, the thunder of bells melting and collapsing from their towers. The air itself seemed to burn, hot winds rushing through the narrow streets, carrying sparks, turning the fire into a hurricane. The sky was dark at noon, filled with thick smoke that blotted out the sun. Yet beneath that smoky shroud, the city glowed red and gold. From the hills outside London, it looked as though a second sun had risen within the walls, shifting and flickering, consuming everything. The glow was so bright that sailors at sea miles away reported seeing the city lit as though dawn had come again, even at midnight. The Thames, once a refuge, now reflected the inferno. Fire leapt to warehouses along its banks, filling the river with burning timbers and barrels. Barges caught alight, their cargo exploding, sending fiery debris drifting downstream. Imagine standing on the river's edge, watching sparks fall onto the water, where they hiss and vanish, only to reappear moments later on another roof, another ship, another wharf. The heat was unbearable. People trying to carry goods found their clothes singed, their hair singed, their skin blistered by the air alone. Even those far from the flames felt the press of heat on their faces, the smoke in their lungs. Ash fell constantly, coating skin and clothes in a grey dust. The city, once noisy with bells and markets, was now a single sound. The endless roar of destruction. Streets that had once been bustling with life were now impassable. Imagine walking down a lane where the fire pressed on both sides, flames leaning inward like walls. The ground is hot beneath your feet, stones cracking from the heat. The air is thick, your breath ragged, your eyes burning with smoke. Ahead you see only fire, and behind you only more. Escape feels impossible. In some places, families still tried to save possessions. Men dragged carts until the wheels caught sparks and burned, collapsing in flames. Women carried bundles only to drop them when the fire pressed too close. Children cried out for toys, for pets, for the familiar things of home, but there was no time. All that mattered was survival, and survival meant fleeing faster than the fire could chase. Even the strongest buildings could not stand. Holes of stone cracked in the heat. Vaults collapsed, walls buckled, and what was thought indestructible fell like tinder. The fire did not distinguish between a grand merchant's house and a poor man's hut. Both burned alike, reduced to ash within minutes. From the safety of the fields outside the walls, the sight was overwhelming. Imagine thousands of people standing in silence, their faces lit by fire, watching as the city they had known all their lives was erased. Some wept openly, their voices carried on the smoky wind. Others stood still, stunned, their bodies swaying with exhaustion and grief. For many, the sight was too great to understand. It seemed unreal, like a vision of the end of the world. At its height, the fire consumed 4/5 of the city of London, nearly 90 churches, 13,000 houses, halls, markets, schools, prisons, libraries. Centuries of history vanished in 4 days of flame. The city was no longer a city. It was a furnace. And yet, within this destruction, life still clung. Families huddled in fields, clutching one another. Priests prayed aloud, their words trembling but steady. Merchants counted coins salvaged from ruins, determined to rebuild. Children, even amid smoke, still found time to laugh, to chase one another through carts and tents, unaware of the full weight of the loss. London was burning, but Londoners endured. The fire at its height was unstoppable, unanswerable. It moved as it pleased, burned what it found, spared little. For those who lived through it, it was not only fire, it was the sound, the heat, the smell of their world ending and changing forever. And when, at last, it began to subside, what remained was not the city they had known, but something altogether new, a landscape of ash, ruin, and silence. By the 4th night, the great fire of London had reached its height. The city glowed like a furnace, the heat so intense that even in the fields beyond the walls, people shielded their faces from its breath. It seemed endless, unstoppable. Yet, even the fiercest fire depends on wind, fuel, and chance. And it was the wind that finally began to change. In the early hours of the 5th day, the strong east wind that had fanned the flames for so long began to ease. Where once gusts carried sparks across alleys and rivers, now the air grew still, the smoke rising in heavy columns rather than sweeping sideways. Without the wind, the fire lost some of its fury. Its leaps across streets became slower, its spread less certain. For the first time in days, there was pause. Londoners seized the moment. Soldiers and citizens, driven by desperation, used gunpowder to blow up houses, creating afterbreaks. The blasts shook the city, scattering debris, but they worked. Gaps widened, spaces where the fire could not cross so easily. Imagine the scene. Men carrying barrels of powder into half-empty streets, lighting fuses, retreating as explosions thundered, leaving behind rubble instead of roofs. It was destruction by choice, but destruction that saved. In some quarters, the fire burned itself out. Having consumed everything, it found nothing left to feed upon. Streets that had once glowed red now smoldered grey, the air filled with the hiss of collapsing beams, the crackle of embers slowly dying. Families crept closer, peering from a distance, their eyes wide with exhaustion and disbelief. By September 6th, the worst was over. The fire no longer roared like a storm. It smoldered, it hissed, it flared in corners, but it did not advance. Londoners who had fled began to venture back into the ruins. Imagine walking into your street, the ground still hot beneath your feet, the walls of your home standing blackened and hollow. Smoke curls upward from the rubble, the air heavy with the acrid stench of ash and charred wood. Around you, silence, broken only by the crackle of dying fire and the murmur of others searching for what remained. Hope returned, slowly, timidly. For 4 days, The fire had been master of the city. Now, at last, it had been beaten back. Families embraced in relief, though their homes were gone. Merchants counted themselves lucky to have survived, even with their fortunes lost. Priests raised their hands in thanks, calling the subsiding fire a sign of God's mercy after his judgment. Yet, even as hope stirred, the scale of loss was undeniable. Nearly the entire city within the walls had been destroyed. Streets, once busy with markets, were now lines of ash. Churches stood roofless, their spires toppled. Guildhalls, schools, and homes were gone. London, as it had been known, no longer existed. Still, Londoners were alive. The fire had taken their buildings, but not their spirit. Already, in the fields, plans for rebuilding were whispered. Already, men spoke of stronger houses, wider streets, stone instead of timber. Amid the smoke, imagination flickered toward a future city, one that might rise even from this devastation. Imagine standing on a hill as the fire dies, watching smoke drift upward into a pale, washed-out sky. The air smells of ruin, but also of endings. The roar is gone, the glow has faded. For the first time in days, you hear birdsong again, faint but steady. It is a fragile sound, but it carries promise. The fire has subsided. What remains is ruin, silence, and the uncertain beginning of something new. When the last embers cooled, Londoners could at last see their city clearly. The fire that had raged for 4 days left behind a landscape unrecognizable, a place of ruins and silence where once there had been bustling life. Imagine walking through the city gates on the morning after the fire had ended. The air still smells of smoke, sharp and bitter, clinging to clothes and hair. Ash drifts on the breeze like snow, soft and grey. The ground is warm beneath your feet, stones cracked from heat, timbers blackened into skeletal shapes. What had been streets are now paths of rubble. What had been houses are now hollow shells, their walls leaning precariously, their roofs gone. The scale of destruction was almost beyond comprehension. Nearly 13,000 houses reduced to ash. 87 parish churches burned to ruin. The Great Guildhall, a hollow, scorched shell. The Royal Exchange gone, its arcades silent. St. Paul's Cathedral, once towering, now a blackened carcass of stone and smoke. In total, 4/5 of the City of London had vanished. The numbers tell one story, but the experience tells another. Entire neighborhoods were erased. Families who once lived side by side now stood together in fields, staring back at a city where nothing remained of their homes. Merchants who had built their fortunes over decades found their warehouses empty, their goods consumed. Priests returned to parishes that no longer existed. It was not only loss of property, but loss of place, memory, and identity. Imagine standing in Cheapside, once the grand street of London's trade. Now it is silent. The shops are gone, their goods turned to ash, their timbers lying in heaps. The sound of haggling, of carts, of laughter is gone. Only the faint crackle of cooling embers remains. In the ruins, small details catch the eye. A melted bell twisted into new shape. A wall of stone standing alone, all else collapsed around it. A fragment of charred tapestry, its pattern still faintly visible. A scorched Bible, its pages fused together. These remnants speak more loudly than numbers. Tokens of lives interrupted, treasures reduced to fragments. The scale of homelessness was immense. Estimates suggest that 70,000 to 80,000 Londoners were displaced. Entire families now lived in tents, huts, or open fields. The city's population, once tightly packed into winding lanes, was scattered, uncertain of where to go. And yet, Amid the ruin, life stirred. Vendors set up makeshift stalls in the rubble, selling bread, fruit, or ale from carts. Children picked through ash for scraps of metal or wood, treasures of a new kind. Neighbors embraced, sharing grief and relief in equal measure. The city was destroyed, but its people remained. For the authorities, the task of reckoning began. Committees were formed to record losses, to plan rebuilding, to assign blame. Some estimated the financial loss at millions of pounds, an unimaginable sum in the 17th century. But beyond numbers, the deeper cost was harder to measure. The loss of history, of memory, of the familiar streets that had shaped daily life for generations. Imagine sitting on the steps of what had once been your home. The stones are warm, the smell of smoke sharp in your nose. Around you, your neighbors do the same, each staring at their own ruin. Words feel small, inadequate. All you can do is look and breathe and accept that nothing will be as it was. The fire had not only destroyed buildings, it had destroyed the shape of the city itself. When London rose again, it would be different. Wider streets, stone houses, new plans. But for those who lived through it, that future was still distant. For now, there was only ash, silence, and loss. The fire had ended. The smoke drifted into the autumn sky, leaving behind not a city, but a blank canvas of ash and rubble. And in that emptiness, Londoners began to ask, what comes next? In the immediate days after the fire, survival was still foremost. Finding food, shelter, warmth. Yet even then, thoughts of rebuilding stirred. London was not abandoned. Its people were still here, and they could not live forever in fields and camps. The city would rise again. The question was how. Great men stepped forward with plans. Sir Christopher Wren, the brilliant architect, imagined a new London of grandeur and order. Gone would be the narrow, crooked lanes that had fed the fire. In their place, broad boulevards and squares, wide enough to resist flames. St. Paul's Cathedral would be rebuilt, not as the Gothic spire that had fallen, but as a domed masterpiece, rivaling the great churches of Europe. Others proposed similar visions, elegant designs of symmetry and space, of beauty and strength. On paper, the ruined city became something new. A place of wide avenues, of riverside promenades, of light and air. For a moment, imagination soared above the ashes. But reality soon pressed in. The city was not empty land, but a ruin still owned by thousands. Merchants, landlords, and families all held claims, all desperate to rebuild quickly, to restore what they had lost. Few wished to wait for grand designs. Few could afford it. They wanted houses, not boulevards, shops, not promenades. The elegant plans faded into dreams, while London rebuilt itself street by street, compromise by compromise. Imagine walking through the city a year later. Houses rise from the rubble, this time of brick and stone, stronger than before. Streets are widened, though not as broad as Wren imagined. Markets return, stalls set up amid ruins, voices once again filling the air. The smell of fresh mortar replaces the acrid stench of smoke. Slowly, life seeps back into the city. The rebuilding was not without rules. Parliament decreed that houses must be built of stone or brick, not timber, to resist future fires. Roofs must be tiled, chimneys secured, walls thicker. It was not the grand city of wide boulevards, but it was safer, stronger, more resistant to disaster. London had learned its lesson, even if it could not wholly remake itself. The churches, too, rose again. Christopher Wren was given the task of designing new ones, 50 in total, each with its own elegance, each a mark of renewal. Most famously, he would rebuild St. Paul's Cathedral, not as it had been, but as it stands today, crowned with its great dome, a symbol of resilience and rebirth. Imagine being a Londoner in the decades after the fire. Walking streets still half rebuilt, scaffolding still clinging to walls. You remember the fire, the loss, the nights in the fields. And yet, here you are, back in your home, your shop, your church. The city lives again, not as it was, but as it could be. For many, the rebuilding was bittersweet. They longed for the familiar streets of their youth, the crooked lanes, the timber houses, but they also took pride in the new city rising from ash. London had been destroyed, yet it had not died. It had remade itself, carrying forward memory and loss into a future of brick and stone. And so the Great Fire, for all its destruction, became not only an ending but a beginning. Out of loss came resilience. Out of ruin came renewal. Out of smoke rose a city stronger, prouder, and more enduring than before. Memory and blame. How the fire was remembered. Disasters do not end when the flames die. They linger in memory, in stories told, in questions asked, in blame assigned. The Great Fire of London was no different. In the days immediately after, blame fell swiftly. Some pointed to Thomas Fariner, the baker in Pudding Lane, whose oven was said to have sparked the blaze. Though he survived and swore he had extinguished his fires, suspicion clung to him. His maid, the first to die in the flames, could not testify otherwise. Fariner was spared official blame, but in popular memory, his bakery remained the spark of catastrophe. Others sought wider culprits. Foreigners were easy targets. England was at war with both the Dutch and the French, and many believed the fire was an act of sabotage. Crowds attacked strangers in the streets, especially those with accents, seizing on fear as certainty. Imagine a French merchant fleeing the fire like everyone else, only to be beaten by neighbors convinced he had lit the flames. For some, the enemy was not fire, but the foreigner who must have caused it. The most infamous scapegoat was Robert Hubert, a French watchmaker. He confessed under pressure to setting the fire, claiming he had thrown a fireball into Fariner's bakery. His story was inconsistent, riddled with impossibilities, but fear demanded a culprit. He was tried, convicted, and executed. Many knew his confession was false, yet his death gave the illusion of closure. For years, his name was spoken as if the fire had been the work of a single man, rather than wind, timber, and chance. Beyond individuals, some saw the fire as divine punishment. Ministers preached that London had grown sinful, indulgent, proud. The year 1666 seemed no coincidence, its number tied to the number of the beast. For many, the fire was God's judgment, a cleansing of vice and vanity. This belief colored sermons and writings for decades, a reminder that the fire was as much spiritual as physical. Over time, memory softened. The fire became less a punishment, more a turning point. Writers described it as the event that reshaped London, replacing timber with stone, crooked lanes with wider streets, fragility with strength. The fire was remembered not only for destruction, but for renewal. Imagine a child in the early 1700s listening to a grandfather recall the fire. His eyes distant, he speaks of running into the fields, of sleeping on the grass while the sky glowed red, of walking through streets of ash. For the child, the story feels both terrifying and wondrous, a tale of survival and change. For the grandfather, it is memory, still heavy but softened by time. Even centuries later, the Great Fire remained part of London's identity. Monuments were built. Most famously, the tall column simply called the Monument rising near Pudding Lane, inscribed with the story of destruction and renewal. For Londoners, it was a reminder etched into stone, pointing both upward to the sky and backward into history. Blame shifted, softened, or was forgotten. Memory endured. The fire was woven into the city's story, a disaster that destroyed, but also a fire that forged. Londoners carried its lessons forward, their streets forever shaped by its absence and its aftermath. Lessons of the fire, safety, change, and the shape of the modern city when the fire subsided and the ashes cooled. Londoners faced not only the task of rebuilding, but also of learning. The fire had revealed the fragility of their city, the risks of narrow streets and timber houses, the dangers of hesitation and poor planning. Out of loss came lessons. Hard, painful, but lasting. The most obvious change was in building. Parliament decreed that no more houses could be built of timber and pitch, the fuel that had fed the flames. Instead, homes would rise from brick and stone. Roofs would be tiled, chimneys strengthened, walls thicker. It was slower, more costly, but stronger. The crooked, leaning timber houses that had once defined London were gone. In their place came sturdier rows, more resistant to fire. Streets, too, were altered. They were widened, though not to the grand avenues imagined by architects like Christopher Wren. Still, they no longer leaned so close together that flames could leap across in seconds. Open spaces were left near important buildings, creating buffers that could halt fires spread. London became less cramped, less fragile, more deliberate. The fire also reshaped the city's consciousness. No longer could people dismiss small flames as ordinary. Watchmen grew more vigilant, fire hooks and buckets more common, and early insurance companies emerged, offering protection against future loss. The very idea of organized firefighting began to take root, born out of the memory of helplessness during those 4 terrible days. Beyond architecture and safety, the fire left lessons of resilience. London had been struck by plague only the year before. Thousands dead, streets emptied. Then the fire had come, wiping out its very fabric. Yet the city endured. Its people rebuilt, adapted, and grew. In time, London became not only stronger but prouder, its new churches and houses standing as symbols of survival. Imagine walking through the rebuilt streets decades later. St. Paul's Cathedral rises with its great dome, a masterpiece of renewal. Rows of brick houses stand firm, orderly, and solid. The markets bustle again, the voices of trade filling the air. Few who pass through these streets think of the ashes beneath. Yet they are always there. The memory of fire woven into every brick. The lessons of the Great Fire reached beyond London. Other cities watched and learned. The need for stronger materials, wider streets, more vigilance spread across Europe. The fire had shown that cities, no matter how old or proud, could fall in days without preparation. And for London itself, the fire became a paradox. Its greatest destruction, but also its turning point. It destroyed, but it also created. It erased, but it also remade. The city that rose was not the same as the one that fell, but it carried the memory of its loss and the strength of its renewal. The Great Fire of London remains, centuries later, a symbol of both vulnerability and resilience. A reminder that what seems permanent can vanish in moments. And yet, from ashes, life can begin again. And so, we have walked together through the Great Fire of London. We have stood in the narrow streets before the first spark caught, walked through the roar of flames as they consumed markets and churches, and sat with the thousands who huddled in open fields, watching their city burn. We have seen ruin, but also resilience. Destruction, but also renewal. The fire was a tragedy. It took homes, treasures, and memories. It left tens of thousands without shelter, forced into camps and tents, their lives overturned in days. And yet, it did not destroy London itself. From the ashes rose a new city, stronger, safer, shaped by lessons carved in fire. When you think of those days, imagine not only the heat and smoke, but also the quiet strength of the people who endured. Neighbors helping neighbors, families carrying one another, voices praying together as the flames lit the sky. That, too, is part of the story. Survival in the face of loss. And now, as you lie here, listening, perhaps with your eyes closed, breathing slow and steady, you may reflect on how far away that world is. You are not in the fields of Moorfields, watching ash drift like snow. You are here, safe, in the quiet of your own space. The fire has long since ended. The city has been rebuilt. And you are warm, calm, and at rest. As this story ends, I invite you to remain. I have added soothing music at the end of this video, soft and steady, to carry you gently towards sleep. Allow yourself to drift as the notes unfold, each one quieter than the last, guiding you deeper into stillness. The Great Fire of London reminds us that nothing is permanent, and yet, from endings, beginnings can grow. From ash, a new city rose. From ruin, resilience. And tonight, from the story of long ago, may you find peace, calm, and rest. Good night.